Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode about the movies with William Fletcher as usual. I'm your host, Jen, and I'm joined this week by the returning Aaron Laffin.
G'day.
And you're back joining me this week because this week we're going to be looking at the MCU Captain America trilogy to tie into the release of Captain America Brave New World. I'm gonna be honest. I'm not that excited for this new Captain America. I'm just gonna be honest.
They should just made a standalone Hulk movie.
I don't think they have that because I believe Universal owns the rights to make Hulk movies. So Marvel.
Oh, really?
Or Disney can't.
I-
Yeah,
I didn't know
I think it's still going on anyway. But yeah, apparently Disney doesn't have the rights to make solo Hulk films. So that's why they sort of gave him sort of character arcs and the other, like in Thor Ragnarok, he had his sort of thing there in Infinity War and Endgame. So that's why they can't make solo Hulk films. They have to sort of work around that and find other ways to make Hulk films. I think that's
okay. That makes sense.
Thing, and even it was for a while. Yeah, I mean we'll touch on Captain America: Brave New World just a little bit at the end of this. But yeah, this week we're going to be talking about Captain America: The First Avenger, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and Captain America's Civil War. Talking about. So I rewatched all three of these for the purposes of this. I hadn't seen them in a long time. I don't know why. I just don't get a compulsion to rewatch Marvel. I don't really rewatch films that much in general, but I don't know why. For some reason, Marvel films. I like a lot of them, but a lot of them I just don't feel like I need to see them again, or I necessarily don't have
that.
push to there's some I've rewatched lots of times, but it's not that many. And I like most of them. I just don't rewatch many of them. But yeah, I'd seen all three of them before. But I cannot. I think I'd only seen Civil War once when it first came out.
I was the same, honestly. I hadn't touched Winter Soldier or Civil War at all since then. I've rewatched First Avenger a numerous amount of times. I like to say it's one of my favorites.
I've got a bit of a controversial opinion about these films.
Go for it.
I think Captain America: The First Avenger is the best of the three Captain America films. I'm just gonna put that out there.
I will agree.
Yeah,
I would totally agree.
That's it. Yeah, we're going because I feel like it's always seen as sort of the weakest of the three. I feel like everyone, if you ask someone their favorite Captain America film, they'll either say Winter Soldier or Civil War.
Honestly, I think First Avenger is probably the best one over all the Captain America movies, especially because I feel like it really encapsulates the character of Captain America, from the origins to the end of the movie. It does the whole story, which is really
exactly. Good. Yeah, I mean, we'll just get into this right now since we're already talking about it. Yeah, Captain America: The First Avenger. I think, yeah, it's sort of an interesting one because I feel like it's sort of seen as kind of. I don't think it's seen as a bad Marvel movie. I just think it's sort of seen as not one of Marvel's best films. I think it sort of hovers around sort of the mid-tier Marvel films for a lot of people. It's not sort of on the level of the first Avengers or Guardians of the Galaxy or Thor Ragnarok or anything like that. It sort of hovers around the Iron Man 3 area where it's liked, people like the film, but but people don't love it. Which I don't really get. I think it's
unappreciated.
Really good. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's probably. I don't know if it's my second favorite MCU film in the first phase because I do really like Iron Man. I mean, I think The Avengers is the best Phase 1 Marvel movie.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But I haven't seen Iron Man in a long time, so I don't know how so maybe I'll have to just rewatch Iron Man and see where it sits for me. But I think the first Avenger, it's just a lot of fun. It's just it's taking something quite silly, just because the inherent nature of what Captain America is a propaganda symbol
exactly.
effectively. And I
And they
think,
use that in the movie.
yeah, they use yeah, in the film, and it really works there because it does make sense. It's like it takes something that could be really silly, and they sort of ground it in a realm of reality, which I like. Not that I have a problem with like comic book silliness, like I'm totally fine with that, but this was sort of early days Marvel where they couldn't really go too big yet. Like they sort of had to sort of ground their films like a little bit more. This was before they could make Guardians of the Galaxy and, all the
Yeah.
other wacky shit they're making now. This was a time where like Iron Man, Iron Man, it's pretty grounded. He's basically Batman. Hulk, Hulk's like a bit bigger, but it's like, Hulk, people know
Yeah.
who the Hulk is. Like he's a known character. Thor, he's a god, but he doesn't really have his god powers for most of that first Thor film, so like that's okay. And this one's not this like one is just a bit silly just because I mean like you've seen the outfit, like Captain America's suit, and it can be quite silly. Like it can be quite silly.
I didn't mind his outfit. Like, of course, the first outfit he's in the movie is supposed to be the propaganda outfit, and it's not, it's not
Yeah.
realistic. But when you get later on in the movie where he's got his actual proper, military
Mm,
themed outfit, and they've done a really good job to converting that into a really nice looking military cool superhero
mm.
outfit. And so I feel like the first one's supposed to be kind of silly, kind of degrading, which it is, and he feels pretty degraded in the suit. And then the second outfit in the movie is like, oh, he's a soldier now, which is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it sort of it works really well to sort of show that. And because I mean Captain America was a when he was like created in the comics, he was a propaganda, like I mean the
Oh,
first Captain America
100%.
comic is him punching Hitler in the
Hitler.
face. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's sort of he was always sort of a propaganda piece, and I like that this film sort of acknowledges that and makes it part of the film, and sort of it doesn't shy away from that element. It makes it part of the story, and I think that's good because there are some sort of comic book films that sort of do try and shy away, that try and don't embrace elements of the comics and try to make sort of a more gritty realism, and that is
Oh
kind
yeah.
of a bit less interesting, and I don't like that. I like the Nolan Batman films. Like I think I like what Nolan did with those Batman films, but I'm also okay. I do kind of prefer when comic book films just embrace the absurdity of what they're doing. Like
Oh yeah. Well, a comic book movie is always absurd, like
yeah,
comic books aren't grounded in reality for a reason.
just to touch on the MCU film we got last year, Deadpool and Wolverine, which we talked about Deadpool before. Deadpool Wolverine. It was just a lot of fun to just watch, like, because like Deadpool Wolverine is like one of the most comic book esque comic book movies, if that makes sense. Like it's just completely out there, like as a
And
comic book.
I feel like that's why the movie was so good and was so popular, was that
Mm,
they went back to the roots and just was like, yep, sweet, we're just gonna make a comic book movie,
mhm.
and we're not gonna make it overcomplicated or add a bunch of other shit to it. It's straight up comic book movie, and it's like bang, they nailed it on the coffin.
Yeah, exactly. I think I like Deadpool Wolverine quite a bit. I thought it was really fun. Some of the writing was a bit wonky, but it's like it is just kind of like a cartoon. Like it's like who cares? It's like let's just have fun. Just having Deadpool and Wolverine just bouncing off each other, just doing silly comic book shit is like fine. So I went with that, and I was okay with that, and I think that this film sort of got that happy medium of it acknowledges comics and it sort of embraces elements of comics, but it grounds it in sort of a more realistic
Yeah,
world, which I
totally
think is
agree.
good. I think that's sort of that's okay. I think that's the happy medium for me. I don't need them to be like 100% faithful, like 100% of the time. Like I know some people are very picky about how like characters from comics are adapted and how it should be like 100% accurate. I'm not what I don't read comics that much in general, so I'm not that bothered when films make changes when adapting comics. or characters from comics. I'm sort of I don't hold it as preciously as I know some people do.
I
Um,
I look, I'll admit I can be a bit picky, but it's mostly like usually if they do the character, they change the character, but they do it right, I'm happy. But if they
yeah,
absolutely butcher the character, like certain other Marvel characters that I won't go into a rant about because you can hear it plenty of other times on the other podcast
yeah,
episodes.
yeah.
Um,
Let's just say Thor: Love and Thunder. Like,
yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, okay. Let's not go. That's
but
yeah.
if you, yeah, I remember. Um, no, I
But
get what you mean though. Yeah, I think changes are like okay as long as you make like a good story. Like I sort of from my perspective, I think that's kind of okay. If you make changes but you still make a good story with the changes, then I'm like, that's cool. I don't care then.
I look, I'll be honest, I feel like the movie was the first movie was pretty good.
Mm,
Like I said, it told the story really well of how Captain America came to be. It portrayed all the characters like Red Skull, one of my favorite villains in the whole of MCU, just because it's not over. Like, first of all, who was playing him? Like, come on, one of the best villains in plays some of the best villains in like cinema history and stuff like that. So like,
mm,
you can't go wrong with that.
yeah, you good weaving. Yeah, exactly.
Hugo, yeah, yeah. And like he just plays that character so well, even though he hated doing it because he hated all the prosthetics and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
he still plays the character so well, and you can feel like he did really does put an effort into it. And he got
hmm
the comic. It kind of gave you that comic book energy, like comic book villain energy, but still like, oh, this is the MCU villain, you know?
I think yeah, it is interesting sometimes when you hear about actors who sort of hated playing these parts and then they do a good job in those parts anyway. It's like I I always sort of I mean one of the common complaints about the MCU, certainly of the early MCU, was that the villains were bad, like a lot of it. And I don't know, I didn't really get that from Red Skull. I thought I didn't think he was like an amazing villain or anything, but I think he worked at what he sort of needed to be. I think there was enough
A
about
good,
him, like he had enough character
I
to
think
sort
it
of
was a good origin
make it
villain, you
feel.
know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He's not like like he's basically just Captain America. To like he's got like he's got Captain America's like abilities, but he just his went wrong and he's a bit mental, like. And I think it's to show like this is what happens when this happens to the wrong guy gets the you know
Yeah,
super
exactly.
soldier serum, which is part of sort of the early stages of the film, is them trying to figure out who will get this super soldier serum. And Tommy Lee Jones's character is like, well, it should be this guy because he's perfect soldier. He's like yada yada yada. But the argument is that Steve Rogers is like just a good guy, who does good things and wants to help people and do well. And so I think that's, yeah, a really solid. I do appreciate, I do like sort of that exploration it goes into, of like, you can't just give it to the guy who
The
is the
perfect
best
soldier.
soldier, because it's gonna sort of it enhances all the worst elements too. And that's the whole sort of thing, is it enhances all the sort of Steve Rogers, who, I mean, I guess we'll talk about him now. I think he's a character who could be quite bland, but I do enough with him across these three films to make him interesting as a character.
Oh yeah. I like to say that Captain America is one of my favorite heroes in the MCU.
Yeah, I think they do a good job giving him stuff to do, because he's not a yeah, he's not like, I like Chris Evans. I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say he's like the greatest actor or anything, like, but I think he fits this part and he does a really good job in that part. And just seeing him in sort of the other films and how he bounces off of Robert Downey Jr. in the Avengers films and Civil War, and how he bounces off Haley Atwell in this Captain America film. I think they have great chemistry together. I think he just fits that part. I mean, the MCU, I think, for when they started, sort of the first few phases, they got really good at casting. I think sort of now they've become a bit worse at casting characters. I think they've
Oh yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what's happened because a lot of the casting, it sort of the more recent casting, it just feels like they're just getting big name actors because they can get big name actors in it, and it
Exactly.
doesn't
Exactly.
really work. Like this was, these earlier films. Robert Downey Jr. was like was not well. He was like a known entity as an actor. He'd done things, but this was also a few years after all his drug problems and his addiction issues and everything. So
Oh
they
yeah.
sort of were taking a bit of a gamble on him, and that worked out. And these films sort of launched the careers of Chris Evans. He'd done films, but this was like what made him an A-list star. And Chris Hemsworth and that kind of thing. So I think that they weren't casting big name actors; they were just casting actors who fit the roles. And now it just sort of feels like they're just casting famous,
Big name actors.
big names, yeah, just because they can, and it'll get people like, oh, they've cast like insert the here, they're gonna be in the next film, and it's just like it doesn't work like
Harrison
that. You can't really.
Ford.
Oh my god! I mean, we'll have to talk about that because that's
Yeah.
just weird as hell. But we'll touch on that in a little bit. But I think they do a lot of character because Captain America could be a very bland character. He's just this, really good guy who just helps people and does the right thing all the time, but they give him enough to make him interesting.
Interesting. I again, like I honestly, I think the whole plot line, the movie, the
Mm,
whole like all the sets look really nice. I really like all the sets.
mm,
The visual effects, like I of the time, turning Chris Evan really scrawny looking. Like
yeah,
if you go like that visual effect isn't too bad. Like you can tell it's a little bit off. You can tell there's a
yeah,
little bit uncanniness to it. It's not horrible, and they've done a
no.
good job.
Yeah,
Terrible.
I think the film having being set in World War II does help it stand out. Like it does have a unique. It's got a unique selling point
Unique
of like
vibe.
this is the World War.
It's just saying unique view. It's got that World War Two.
Oh yeah,
Exactly what you were just saying. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It gives it a different flavor. It makes it stand out more. Like this is the World War II MCU film. But sort of all the others are set in sort of just modern day. It's like this. They don't really have a. They're not that unique, really. It's just like, oh, it's just present day. But this gives it, yeah, a special little something that just adds character to it. And I really, and I like that. I think, yeah, I don't think it's like I don't know if I'd say it's. I think like in terms of like a lot of the Marvel films sort of do get criticized for sort of being very sort of bland in how they're sort of directed and put together, and they're all kind of. I don't really get that, to be honest. I think that there's a lot about the films, not all the films, but like I think kept it has a unique, not really the other films in this franchise. I wouldn't say anyway, and I think that it does a lot to, and it gives it something to sort of help. Again, it makes Captain America different from the other Avengers. That's a thing that makes that Avengers work, is they're all just completely different people, and having a guy who's all his friends are dead or are really old now and left behind, and he's like the one guy left from this period of time. I think is really interesting, and I wish they sort of focused on that kind of a bit more in his films. I kind of wish, yeah,
In
what's it?
like
Winter
number
Soldier. I
two.
kind of, yeah, I wish they sort of spent a little bit more time focusing on him sort of getting used to modern day, because I think that's one of the interesting parts of the Captain America character, and I think
Is him getting
that,
used to modern day.
yeah, and I think like they could have done maybe a bit more of that. I just don't. I think there's like just not enough of like there's that bit in the. Well, I mean, we'll get into more properly later on, but there's that sort of bit where he's got the list of things he needs to catch up on, and like that's like funny as
Yeah,
like an
that's
over,
funny.
but should, yeah, but there should be more like that could just be an entire film is just him getting used to, and I think we'll touch on it more as we go on, but I like that these Captain America films do feel like an actual trilogy of films, whereas like they sort of flow into each other. Like the Iron Man trilogy, they're not massively connected from like film to film, I wouldn't say, whereas these films sort of like it's sort of a continuing story across all three films. Whereas, yeah, the
Yeah,
Thor films don't really have that, or the Iron Man films don't really do that.
the I feel like like the second film, going into the second film, you also get to feel a bit of his experience from the first. Like from the first film, you learn that from like how he comes from like a inexperienced soldier to like a veteran, like just throughout the film. And then like you see a little bit in number two where like he reads the signs of certain things pretty quickly. Say for instance the elevator scene. I won't go into too much detail, but because we'll talk about that later, I'm guessing. Yeah, like it shows his beginnings, and I feel like it shows his beginnings really well leading up to the next film, which is really good. I definitely think it's for a origin movie for a Marvel movie. I feel like it's one of the best ones to really introduce a character. Because you introduce a bunch of other big player characters in it as well, like Howard Stark and all that kind of stuff. Bucky,
Yeah,
of
Bucky,
course, Cap
obviously.
himself. Yeah, so like you introduce so much, and like the dynamic between Bucky and Cap was really nice. I felt a really good friendship in between them. Not sure how
Yeah.
the two actors what they were like on set and all that together, but
Mhm.
like I know the characters seemed very like it seemed like a genuine friendship.
Yeah, an element that I think works really well. Is they do come across as friends, and a big part of making these films work is like, I mean, he spends a lot of Winter Soldier and pretty much the entirety of Civil War trying to, yeah, protect Bucky is basically what he's doing for, the second two Captain America films, and or trying to sort of reason with him. And I think that it works that they've got some good chemistry. They work like they make sense.
hundred
Friends.
percent.
It's not like you. I definitely have gotten that in some films where I'm meant to be where it's trying to convince me like these characters are friends. They've known each other for a long time. But like one example that I'll mention that always stands out to me is in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 when they introduce Harry Osborn, and it's sort of for some reason, and it's trying to convince us that Harry and Peter have known each other for years, even though Peter, like, he's never been mentioned before and he wasn't even in the previous one. That just does not work and doesn't.
Oh,
I don't
definitely.
buy into that. Whereas this, it's like, you know, they're together as friends pretty early on in the film. There's a solid they're friends, and they
Solid
have
foundation.
chemistry, a solid foundation right up front. Bucky saves Cap from a beating, or the middle of a beating rather, and they work as, yeah, a pair. They work as friends, and it makes sense, um, when they sort of, yeah, when there's sort of elements of their
Yeah,
friendship in the
exactly.
other films. Um, I mean, I guess since we're talking about Bucky, Sebastian Stan, who's Bucky, I think I think he's a really solid actor just in general. I've seen some of his more non-MCU work, and I think he's a really good actor. Um, I think he, I think he's all right here. I don't think Bucky in general is like the most interesting. Like, I don't think there's
Which is a
quite
shame.
enough of Bucky for me to really think he's like a great character or anything. Like, I think they do a lot with Cap as a character, but Bucky, he never feels like they truly focus on his character and
Oh,
really,
yeah.
yeah, give him enough for me to sort of think like, oh, I'm really like invested in this. Like, I think he works when he's with Cap, and then when he's not with Cap, I just don't think it works as well. Like, I think there's some, yeah, with Cap. where that works, and then sort of the other times where it's not, it's sort of not as. And I don't really know what it is per se. Like because they did the Falcon and the Winter
The
Soldier
Winter
TV
Soldier.
show,
Yeah.
which I mean I didn't think was that great, to be honest.
I didn't
Uh,
watch it at all. I was like,
it
I'm not interested.
Yeah, it was quite it wasn't great. It really fell apart by the end. And yeah, just and like Bucky is like one of the main characters in that show. Um but it just doesn't feel like they do enough with him for me to be like, oh, he's a great character. I
100% agree. Like, I feel like Bucky's a very interesting, could be a very interesting character and all that. And honestly, I was kind of hoping he was going to become Captain America, to be honest. But I won't go too much detail into that. I feel like he could have been a very interesting character, and then he got really quickly like swept away underneath the rug as a side character. And don't get me wrong, like in the second movie he becomes a pretty major plot point, and same in like kind of the third one, but like in everything else he's like, oh, he's just a guy with a gun and a metal arm.
I definitely agree. I mean, I also kind of thought he could become Captain America, but that didn't happen.
I mean,
And I think
Falcon's not a bad choice, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, I personally would have preferred if they had retired Captain America and just Steve Rogers was the Captain America. Then he's not going to be it anymore. So there's not going to be Captain America. But yeah, the films just do they sort of shortchange Bucky a bit as a character. There's like a lot about him that is really interesting, and then they just don't give him enough time to be a great character, which I think is
could
a real
be
shame.
interesting. Which is a real shame again, like yeah, like what you said, like he has the like we've been saying this whole time, he has the opportunities to be a really interesting character and they just don't use it. And it's like, oh, okay. That kind of sucks, I guess. Bucky has like a huge impact on Captain America's character in general. Like, like the first time he hears that Bucky's alive, he freezes up and goes,
Yeah.
he's alive. And the same thing happens in bloody Endgame. When
Mm,
Cap mentions to his past self that Bucky's alive, he freezes up because he knows that's a weakness because that's such a shock and a reveal. And a big thing
yeah.
for his character. So like, Bucky has a lot of chance to be a very strong character, but they just don't utilize him enough, or utilize him in the right way.
Alongside Bucky, you've got Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter, who I really like. Just in general, I think she does it a lot, and she's got. I mean, one of the big stumbling blocks that I find with a lot of superhero films is just the love stories are kind of bad. Like they're not well
Mm.
done generally for me. Like I can't. I could think of maybe like a handful. Like
I didn't mind Pepper and Tony. I don't mind
Pepper and
that.
Tony is alright. They're not like amazing, but I don't mind
No.
them.
MCU doesn't do relationships too often, but I felt like this
Mm,
relationship was pretty good. I actually really like this. And like it's
mm,
a big thing for his character to have, be
mm.
in love with Agent Carter. It's a big driving point.
Yeah.
And it's a big driving point of him going into the future and be like, oh,
Mm.
she's now like 90 something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think they do a solid job of giving them a lot of character. So like there's that moment at the end of the first film, the self sacrifice that Steve has to make, and that's a really nice moment. I think there's a lot of really yeah. I think that there's some really that's just a really lovely moment where he's got like the I don't know, is it like a compass or
Like
whatever he's got with
I think it's a timepiece. Yeah, and like at the end when they're like organizing to go out and have a dance, and then like you see afterwards after they dig him up, and yeah, Nick Fury approaches him and he's like, "Oh, I just had a dance" or something like that. He says something along the lines of that at the end.
Mm,
real coming to realize that he's now so far in the future, and everyone back in the past is
I think
unfortunately.
that's a really lovely ending to that. And I mean, I think the ending of the first Captain America film is one of the best MCU endings.
Oh,
Like it's
100%.
where he wakes up in the modern day,
They
and
try to fake it at first.
yeah, they try to. Yeah, I think like that is fantastic, and he runs out, and he sees like all the billboards in like New York and everything, and then there's like Nick Fury there, and he's like Cap or whatever, and he's like, no, yeah, I had a date, and it's like, and it just ends on that moment. I think that's like one of the best endings in any of these films. Like it's truly a wonderful ending because it really it leaves you sort of sitting on like this moment of like shit, like you really like, and it just it ends and you just sort of have to sit in that moment and just
And it
realize that like yeah,
puts him at
all of
what
his.
type of character he is. He sacrificed everything.
And I think that it does a fantastic job of it does so much for Steve as a character because he spent the entire film doing this. And I think that the film really like I really, really was enjoying the film, and then that sort of final scene happens, and I'm like, this is great. Like I was really liking it, and then the ending it just sort of ties it together really nicely. And I think it does a great job of wrapping up the story while also setting up like, okay, this is what we're gonna have to we're gonna focus on this in like a future film. And unfortunately, we don't really get that, which is like a criticism I have, is we don't really focus on the interesting part, I think, of Captain America.
Well, we do have like one interesting part. I think it's in like the second film when
Mm,
Peggy has passed away, and it's like
mm.
Peggy's granddaughter or some shit. Which now thinking back to it, most likely be Cap's granddaughter, and like they get a bit of a relationship, and it's like, what is going on? Like they
Oh,
try
yeah.
to dive into it a little bit. Yeah, you get what I'm saying.
I mean, that's we'll get into that a bit later on, but that's one of the worst moments in any of these films. I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, that was like, okay, I see what you're trying to do, but kind of ick, especially again with the new revelation after Endgame that that could possibly be his granddaughter.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, let's just.
But I feel like for me, like at first, like I totally forgot about the score, right? And then
Mm,
like I remember like hearing the score and like those the trumpets that you hear throughout the movie. And I was like, wait,
mm,
that's and I remembered like, oh, like that when I first heard the trumpets when he, picked up Thor's hammer for the first time. And I was like, I remember that score, but I can't remember what MCU movie that's from. And then like going back, I'm like, oh,
mm,
that's the that's his main theme. That's like the main like thing in the first movie where,
mm,
when something epic happens, those trumpets play. And I'm like, oh, how didn't I remember that at all to begin
mm,
with? And the music is just so good. And I feel like it really elevates the movie a lot more than, say, some other the Marvel movies.
mm.
But honestly, I think we should take that to the second movie now, honestly.
Yeah. Do you want to put a rating on the first film now, or do you want to leave the ratings until the end?
I think leaving it to the end would probably be the best course because then like we
Mhm.
can rank them as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This for the longest time used to be my favorite MCU film.
Really?
But it's not anymore. I rewatched it recently and it's not as good as I remembered it being. But I do still really like it. I do think it's really good.
Fair, fair, fair. Look, I remember like a couple of scenes from it, like off by heart
Mm,
before
mm,
like rewatching it. But like
mm,
I thought it was all right. It's not bad.
mhm.
It's got a lot of action scenes. I do like a lot of the action scenes.
Yeah.
And it does have like some interesting plot points and stuff like that. But I feel like there's like some plot points that you get through this movie, and then like they never really affect anything. Like for instance, like the whole Shield being infiltrated by Hydra kind of plot point. You don't really see that affect anything else in the MCU. I don't feel like they're there, and they like seem like they're going to be major plot points throughout the rest of the movie or franchise,
Mm,
but they don't really get wrapped up, or there's not really anything interesting. Like again, the main plot of Hydra taking over Shield from the inside, and that's
yeah.
like it's a plot point and it's an interesting one, but it really doesn't have any effect overall in the grand scheme of the
Mm.
MCU story.
I get what you mean. I think they sort of dealt with sort of elements of the film in Agents of Shield, but like, who the fuck watches that? Who the fuck what? I didn't watch that show. Like,
I've never watched it.
but I think that no, I get what you mean. I mean, this film brings down like Shield thing as is like not an organization by the end of this film. And I completely I very much I understand. I think yeah, the film definitely could do a bit more in terms of like really focusing on like there's yeah, just a lot more that the film could do that it doesn't do. You know, I do love sort of the I do kind of like conspiratorial stuff in films. Like, I mean, one of my biggest disappointments in the MCU was in Secret Invasion, where they did the Secret Invasion storyline, and I thought, oh, this will be like this could be a really great show about like all characters are going to get revealed as Skrulls,
Girl.
and then it was just a complete and utter mess of a show. And it's just a wasted opportunity to do this potentially fantastic story on a 6 episode TV show when it could be an entire phase of Marvel is like focusing on the Skrulls as villains. So yeah, I get what you mean. I think they do a good job here, sort of making the sort of are doing the best they can with like Shield coming down and the Hydra reveal. I think that it does. I think some of the sort of problems with these films is they're trying to do things that like have obviously been done well in the comics, but in terms of
Putting in a
the
movie.
but in a movie they are limited. Like we'll talk about this with Civil War, but as a YouTuber I know he doesn't really like Civil War as film, and his main point was basically that he thinks the comic does a much better job because it's got so many more characters involved.
And so
That
many more elements in it.
yeah, exactly, and I completely understand that. I think that's very a valid sort of critique of the film, and if I think that's completely fair to be sort of like I didn't I'm not that bothered by it I mean, I haven't read the comic, obviously, so I can't compare it. But I do understand, and I don't agree with that perspective, but I can understand where he's coming from, and I think that's fair. I think yeah, that's sort of the problem with these films is they've got they've got some great stories to adapt, but because they're doing like a 2 and a bit film, you can't really do it the same way as a comic can have many issues over several months really
Oh yeah.
building the story, whereas yeah film it doesn't really what you could do it in like a TV show but you can't do it as a film. So I completely understand the criticism, and I think that, but I do yeah I do really I mean I still do really like this film. I'm gonna be I did think it was yeah I thought it was yeah, really good film. But yeah, it didn't hold up as much on this rewatch, but I do on the whole I do really like it.
It's got like I said, it's got some interesting plot points. The action's really good. Like I one of my favorite scenes is the elevator scene in
Oh yeah,
that
that's a fantastic scene.
the choreograph just it is so well choreographed,
Mm,
because like doing massive high action fight scenes like that in such a refined space,
mm.
it's just so difficult.
Yeah, no, it really it gives it a nice little it gives it something interesting.
And
It
like,
like it gives it some because it's not, I'm used to superhero battles being this big thing, city,
yeah,
level cars being flipped over, but having just a very like in a very claustrophobic fight in this elevator, I think is great.
like the build up and the tension for to that scene is really nice as well. Like,
Oh
like
yeah,
Cap
that's a
knows
great
that
yeah.
these guys are, traders are like ex Hydra or whatever,
Mm,
at this point, and he's like trying to suss it out without actually openly saying like, "Yeah, I know what you're doing," because he doesn't want to
mm,
openly like straight up because he doesn't know how deep the rabbit hole is. He doesn't know how many of them
right.
are actually traders, or if it's just
Mm,
only a couple of them. That's why I really like that fight scene. It's one of my favorite fight scenes in the whole of the MCU, just for just how not simple, but like how interesting it is, and like the build up to it.
and I do like that whole thing.
In Winter Soldier, I didn't really remember too much off by heart
Mhm,
going into it. Like, it has some cool scenes, and that, like, the elevator scene, like I said, was pretty much the one that I remembered
mhm,
the most and like look
mm,
forward to seeing the most. But other than that, I'm like, yeah, it's a movie. It's an MCU movie.
mm,
It's a filler
yeah,
movie, pretty much, from
mm,
getting to one movie to the other. It's like how Thor: Dark World is pretty much like a filler
mm.
movie if you think about it. It's not nothing too.
Yeah. Yeah, I just really like what the film is. I mean, it's directed by the Russo brothers, who sort of became Marvel's like go-to guys. They did some more, talk about in a minute, but they also did the last two. Was they're going to do the next two now because Marvel's really floundering a bit in terms of how they're making, in terms of what they're doing right now. Everything's just sort of a bit of a mess. A thing I want to sort of talk about with this Captain America film is there's Toby Jones is in these films, and he's got his face on the computer when they go into the
Mm,
underground bunker, which I thought was really
as
nice.
Zolo.
Yeah, which I thought that was really cool, and I liked that that was a thing they did, and then they did. Well, they did Modoc, which is kind of a similar thing in Ant-Man 3, which
Modoc was. We don't talk about Modoc. Zolo in this though, that's pretty comic book accurate. Like,
yeah,
Zolo in the comics pretty much just becomes a living computer virus.
yeah. And I mean, again, it's that's that sort of same thing of it's like it's doing that comic book sort of silliness, but sort of grounding it in a way
It works in
in
the MCU.
in the yeah, they could have really done that with the MCU at that sort of point, but the way they sort of establish it and do it in this film actually makes it work. It sort of I guess modernizes it because some comic books, they were written, in the 60s and 50s, in the 40s and 30s even. Some comic books are like really old. And so modernizing it for a 2014 audience, I think, is a good that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's still cool, and I really like it, and I enjoyed how he was a pretty good information dump in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's an information dump, but it doesn't like because some information dumps can be really fucking just poorly written, and it's just like you were just saying that you've got to get out all this exposition, and it's just so poorly
Mm.
handled. This film, it's expositional dialogue, but
But
it
they
doesn't.
actually had to go find him.
Yeah, it actually works to a degree. It's like it's sort of explaining things, but it doesn't feel like no. I think it works quite well here. The expositional dialogue. I mean, yeah, I do really like. I think there's. I mean, we also get Falcon in this film, but I don't think Falcon's a particularly interesting character. I'm gonna be honest. I don't love Falcon that much as a character. I think that
I I feel like how they integrated him into the Marvel movies. wasn't
Mm,
bad. They just don't do anything with his character
they
until he's
don't.
like, oh, he's a Captain America right now. I'm like, well, you haven't really done much with his character to make me be
Yeah,
like, yeah, I want him as Captain America.
they spend the whole in the Winter Soldier show sort of establishing him as Captain America, but he just doesn't. I don't think he's an interesting enough character to sort of justify being yeah, Captain America, and I think you kind of need that from a Captain America to he needs to
Like,
well, it doesn't need to be like an interesting character to be Captain America. I just think they don't do enough with
he
uh
becomes Captain America in the comic books for a brief period, right?
yes,
Don't get me
I know
wrong.
he became yeah, Captain America in the comic books. I
And
believe
he
that
was
was also around
really
the
good.
time that they also made Jane Foster Thor, I believe was around
Yeah, yeah.
similar time.
That was a really I didn't mind that comic book run. It wasn't too bad. But like if if you like look online and look at photos of the comic book Falcon, and like you can instantly get like a different understanding of this how different the characters are.
I just think that Falcon is like don't get enough. We don't really like in all the other MC like he has a bit of character here because they need to establish him, and then it doesn't feel like they give him enough in any of the other films. And like they gave him some character in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show, but that show wasn't very good, so it doesn't really matter if they give him character or not. Um, just purely because it's like you're just sort of yeah, it doesn't feel like the character stuff they give him doesn't feel that earned or particularly justified. And I think that, I mean, that is one of the reasons where I'm not like that excited for this new Captain America film because like Bucky is in a particular character, and I just don't think they're gonna do enough. They've done enough with him to sort of establish him as like a leading cat. I think that's the thing. Is I think the first Captain America film does a lot to establish Steve as a character and his personality and who he is.
I'm upset. There's no Red Wing. That's upsetting. That's such a important character for
Mm,
Falcon. Red
mm.
Wing is his little Falcon sidekick in the
Yeah,
comics.
he because they give him that in the third Captain America film, but it's like a drone basically
His
that
little
flies around.
drone. Like, and it makes sense. You can't really have actual Red Wing in number two wasn't bad. It's a good placeover movie, but and it has good action points and all that, but really it ends up
Mhm.
not going too far too like all the plots don't really convolve doesn't become like one mainstream plot, and they leave a lot of plots untied in it, so it's like the only plot that really gets resolved is Winter Soldier plot. That's about it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do like the film. I like it a lot, but I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's as good as the first Captain America. But yeah, I do like it. And then yeah, they establish Bucky in that, and then yeah, it sort of ends with Shield falling. Nick Fury goes into hide because he has a fake out death, which I hate. I hate. I mean, I don't like fake out deaths in general, but I really don't like it. It feels really cheap. But I mean, that's pretty much all I've got to say on the second film. Do you want to move on to the third film now?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah, so Captain America: Civil War. I mean, this came out really sort of at the peak of my MCU fandom. I was really, really looking forward to this. I mean, I rewatched it this morning actually, like just before we started recording. I rewatched it, but yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it came out because again, I don't know why, I just didn't feel the need to, and I don't understand why I get that with Marvel films. It's like, I mean, yeah, I don't often feel a desire to rewatch films in general, but there was something about Marvel films where I really just didn't feel that invested in being like, yeah, I'll go see that film again, even though I do, like a.
Yeah, it's there's not many Marvel movies that I go like, yeah, I'm gonna rewatch them on purpose. Like, there's usually a
Mhm.
reason why I want to rewatch them, or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. Like there's only like maybe a couple that I'm like, yeah, I'll rewatch that. This movie wasn't bad. I
Mm,
really don't like Tony's character in this movie. I feel like
mm,
Tony was the most stupid he could be in this movie. He's supposed to be a really
yeah.
smart genius character. Like I know it's very emotional, like, oh, he killed my parents, blah blah blah. But like Tony,
Mm.
like the character of Tony would be like, well, it's not really his fault. He's been like brainwashed by Hydra to be a assassin, so it's really not the person's fault in general.
Sort of in the context of like, I think if he had find out, yeah, if you think that sort of he wouldn't react. I think if he wasn't there and he wasn't like right in front of him, it definitely would have been, yeah, a different story. I think the fact I get I do get that, but it didn't really bother me. I think that yeah, no, I understand that, and I think that is a bit of a prop flaw with the yeah, Cap's character. Yeah, sort of my point was sort of gonna be like, I think I'm fine that he makes mistakes as a character. I think that yeah, he should make mistakes. They just try to make like, I get that he's like meant to be the good guy, but it does sort of be like, that does also lead to him not really being able to have much, like Tony Stark, has sort of shades of gray to his character, Steve is kind of just whereas Steve kind of is sort of in the same place for a lot of it. I don't think he really has a massive amount
Yeah.
of like character change. Whereas I think a lot of the other good MCU characters have that.
Another great of mine, like I remember really liking Civil War, but now going back to it, and there's some parts that I'm like, I'm not sure about because like they try to use the main plot of the comic books, but they do nothing with it, which
That
is
was one of
the
my yeah, I went
superhero
in sort of yeah,
registration.
knowing yeah what the comics were. Like I knew the again, as I mentioned, I haven't read the comic, but I knew the general premise. I'm like, that's a great idea for like that's a great for a film of like, there's this this accords that they've got to sign because of all this shit that keeps happening, and then building up, and it's like sort of build collateral damage that's building up. I think that's
Hmm.
great. I just
Like
don't think they first of all, I think that I think that the film yeah, it's just like there's not enough characters really. Like there's that moment, the airport fight sequence, which I think is a great fight sequence. I think it's a great sequence. But there's like
hmm,
meant to be that splash page comic of like all of the characters like running at each other, and it's just
yeah,
kind of not that impressive. Like it's just 12 people running at each other. It's not like, I've seen images of like what the Civil War comic book looks like,
I think the
and it's
most
just like
famous, I feel like
yeah,
the best image that they recreate in the movies is
mm.
the pulsar blast with Cap's shield going against Tony's
Oh
hands.
yeah, that's a fantastic
That's
just
that's a good
image.
shot,
Yeah.
and that's exactly like one of the major images in the Civil War arc. Like that's a good creation. The other one, I was like, it's all right. I see what they're trying to do there. The whole thing with the Accord in the comic books was that they wanted superheroes to register and reveal their identities, so they can
Yeah.
have a little bit more. And like the whole argument, the whole Civil War happened was that some superheroes like Iron Man was like, yeah, I support this because he's been openly Tony Stark as
Mhm.
Iron Man since the beginning. Like, so he's been like, yeah, I support this. Nothing wrong with revealing your identity and all that. And then like, there's a bunch of other superheroes like Captain America who's like, hold on, these guys don't want to do it. They should have their right to their privacy because there's enemies and stuff like that. And like the whole big thing in the comic book was like, say for like one of the big plot points was that Peter Parker agreed with Iron Man and revealed himself as Spider-Man, and it ended
Yes.
up getting like Aunt May seriously hurt, and he ends up switching sides to Captain America's side, and that's
Mhm.
like a big plot point, and like
Yeah.
that's why Civil War in the comic books works so right because it's like all these like it delves into the problems of if should superheroes have a register and reveal their identities, or should they still have privacy so their enemies don't track them down and hurt their families and loved ones.
Mhm.
In this, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
should we disband superheroes or should we not? And it's like, I guess, like it's nothing. It's yeah, they do nothing with it.
Yeah, I think that's completely valid. I think it's the kind of story that they could have saved for, like, obviously, like, just based on how, expensive Robert Downey Jr. is to do that. I kind of get why they're like, we have to do this now. We'll have to, like, because the more films they do, Robert Downey Jr.'s asking price for how much they're gonna pay him is gonna be.
It was still, I still enjoy the movie. Don't get me wrong, like it's still good, and I
Mhm.
still like the plot points and the fight scenes. I can't complain about the fight scenes. I like pretty much the whole fight scenes. And it's like when you get,
Mhm.
it's like the first time you get Ant-Man turning giant and stuff like that, and you get Spider-Man for the first time, in the MCU. But it's just, I feel like it's lacking stuff.
I,
It's just
I do
lacking.
get that. I mean, I think this is the weakest of the three Captain America. I know that sort of general consensus sort of says a lot of people seem to be sort of get better as they go along, which I don't get that personally. I don't think that that's
I
really
think it was carried.
I
I think it was carried on hype.
and yeah, I think Spider-Man being in it and being a character in it was a, because I remember when there was sort of the announcement that Spider-Man was going to be in the MCU. I was on board with that. I was like, yes, like excited to see Spider-Man. Because I love Spider-Man. He's one of my favorite. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
just
I feel like he's
superheroes in
a lot of people's
general.
favorite.
Yeah, and I was just really excited to because I'd seen the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man films, and they weren't great films, so I'm looking forward to them, doing Spider-Man in the MCU. And I mean, yeah, I do really like him in these films. I like Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I don't know if he's my favorite like film Spider-Man, but I do think he is really, yeah, I think he's really great as Spider. And I mean, he's not in the film that much, but he does a solid job with the few minutes, because yeah, there's not much of him in this film, but he does enough with this film to stand out as a character, and I do appreciate that they give him enough character in this film.
I just feel like this movie was rewatching this movie. It was missing something from it. Like it
Hmm.
had some cool things in it, but it was missing something, and it wasn't really a Captain America movie. And I feel like it's miss. I'm feeling like again, like I don't really like how the Civil War thing really happened, mostly due to just you know Tony not liking Bucky for obvious reasons. If they stuck with the Accord a lot better and like really stuck that as the main drive of the plot point, I feel like, but they would have to have done it like at a later stage. Like I feel like a proper Civil War, like Avengers Civil War movie before Infinity War would have been really cool than a standalone like Captain America Civil War movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
doesn't. The big problem with it is none of the events in the film really come back later. Yeah, like they sign the accords, and then the characters basically say, "Yeah, we're just like, yeah, we're not gonna follow it anyway." Though it's just like it doesn't. It makes the whole thing seem kind of pointless. Of like, what was the point of this film if the characters aren't even gonna follow the rules they've just established? The thing they just signed, it seems, yeah, completely
Mm.
pointless to me.
Yeah, so like it doesn't really affect anything. It just seems to be like, oh, let's see Captain America and Iron Man fight.
I mean, do you have more things you want to say on this, or?
Not really. I pretty much just said everything. Like it's well again, like I still like the movie.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong. I still like the movie. and like I still like I said, like I like all the action and all that kind of stuff, but it's just in the grand scheme of things, it's like, eh, they
Mm.
could have done it differently, and I feel like it could have been done better.
Yeah, I mean, I do like it, but yeah, it is the weakest of the three Captain America movies. So I mean, do you want to move into a rating now for these?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I give all three of these films an 8 out of 10. But across the board, I give all three an 8 out of 10. But they are slightly weaker 8 out of 10s as they go.
Uh, I would say honestly, I pretty much agree with that statement, but I would probably give, if I had to really do it, I'll give the first Captain America movie a little bit of a high edge on the other two. Like give it like an 8.5. Like it's a little bit
Yeah,
more than
yeah,
the other
yeah, yeah,
ones.
yeah.
Because like I still rewatching it, I still got like the excitement from watching the movie, and like when the other ones, I'm like, oh, I'm not as excited anymore for
Yeah.
that one. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah, we're tying this into the release of Captain America: Brave New World, which I mean doesn't
I'm
look.
not excited.
Yeah, not really.
Look, I feel like Harrison Ford would have been a good cast, like maybe like I don't know, 4 or 5 years back.
Yeah, I think he's
I
oh,
feel like he's
sorry.
a bit too old to do this kind of stuff now. And from
Yeah,
what I've heard, Red Hulk's only in like 4 minutes of the movie or something like that.
Harrison Ford is 82, so yeah, that's a bit old.
Like, I feel like he could make a good President Ross. Not President, sorry.
Mm,
Ross. I forgot what his title is. General Ross. But like, if he was a bit younger, yeah, okay. I'm probably gonna either wait until it comes to Disney, or I'm just not gonna watch it at all.
yeah, I'm not that excited for this. Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, it's just that it's the writers who did Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which I didn't like really. I thought that was a pretty weak show. So I'm not like that
If
excited for what they're gonna do with this.
if they said,
And
"Oh, it's the same writers of Loki," I would be like, "Oh,
yeah, I just think they gone with the writers of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so it's probably gonna be bad.
it's like Marvel needs something to succeed, like
Yes.
something big coming up to succeed." Like,
Yeah, I think I've pretty much said all I wanted to say. Thank you, Aaron, for joining me for this week's episode.
no worries, always happy to help.
But yeah, anyway, yeah, thank you for joining me. And there's several episodes of this show now. We've done we did 28 Days Later a couple years ago, which they're doing a new one 28 years later now. They're actually making that film. But yeah, thank you all for listening to this week's episode, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.